Good morning, everyone. My name is Henry Rogers. I'm the Executive Director of the Harbor Association of Industry and Commerce, and I want to thank all our attendees for coming today. We appreciate your attendance and your continued support of the HAIC. I also want to make sure I give special thanks to the ports of LA and Long Beach during the entire pandemic. And, historically, they've always been very accessible, responsive, and fantastic to work with. To open today's program, I actually want to introduce one of our new board members, Mr. Mark Kempton from Kempton Strategies. Mark, why don't you come on up?
Thank you very much, Henry. And hopefully you can all hear me. Thank you to HAIC, the board of directors, and the program committee for putting together this event. Thank you also again to the presenting sponsors, the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach. And thank you to the event sponsors, SoCalGas, Mitsubishi Cement Corporation, Pacific Harbor Lines, P2S Incorporated, and Trimble Incorporated. Trimble is also a new member of HAIC, and they are transforming the way the world works by delivering products and services that connect the physical and digital worlds. Core technologies in positioning, modeling, connectivity, and data analytics enable Trimble's customers to improve productivity, quality, safety, and sustainability. From purpose-built products to enterprise lifecycle solutions, Trimble's software, hardware, and services are transforming industries such as construction, transportation, logistics, and geospatial. Representing Trimble here today, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Trevor Clark. Trevor helps major capital project owners learn the benefits of and adopt digital construction technologies, specifically for large marine and federal projects. Trevor came to Trimble after completing his career as the Chief of Construction for West Coast projects for the U.S. Coast Guard, achieving the rank of Lieutenant Commander. He served in several leadership roles on Coast Guard ships in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, but spent the majority of his career in civil and naval engineering. He understands firsthand the delicate balance involved in ensuring that port missions are completed while also executing challenging marine construction projects. Trevor is a graduate of the Georgia Institute of Technology, where he earned dual master's degrees in business administration and civil engineering. He is a licensed PE in the state of California, currently living in the San Francisco Bay Area with his wife and son. Trevor?
Hey, thanks, Mark. Just want to check that my mic is working properly. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. We can hear you great.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mark. I'm so honored to be with you all today. I still remember how in awe I was the first time I steamed into the Coast Guard base at Terminal Island at the Port of Los Angeles. So it's a true pleasure. Trimble is excited to join the HAIC community today. We at Trimble think our portfolio of connected digital construction solutions will help the ports achieve their goals and continue to be the most desirable ports in the nation. My colleagues and I look forward to meeting you all. Please jump over to the virtual room, watch our promotional video, and visit our website. It's now my distinct honor to introduce our presenters. So first, Michael DiBernardo, Deputy Executive Director, Marketing and Customer Relations. Michael DiBernardo is Deputy Executive Director of Marketing and Customer Relations at the Port of Los Angeles, where he oversees the port's cargo marketing, cargo and industrial real estate, waterfront and commercial real estate, environmental management, planning and strategy, and wharfinger divisions. His team spearheads business development, promotion of the port, technological assessments, business intelligence, and analysis of trade data that affects the port's future competitive position. Appointed in January 2015, Mike previously served as Director of Business Development, where he was responsible for the direction and management of the ports. Mike began his career at the port as a student worker in the late 1970s and later as a draftsman in the port's engineering division in the early 1980s. He rejoined the port as a marketing manager in November 2002 after spending 19 years with APL, where he served in various management positions with work experience encompassing intermodal, maritime trade, security, labor, and terminal planning initiatives. A San Pedro native, Mike has a bachelor's degree in business administration from California State University, Dominguez Hills, and a certificate in the executive management program from UCLA. Next is Dr. Noel Hacegaba. He's responsible for managing the day-to-day administrative and operating functions of the port, introducing finance, human resources, real estate, business development, operations, and security. Previously, he served as the Port's senior executive responsible for developing and executing business development strategies to drive volume and revenue growth. In this role, Dr. Hacegaba successfully managed the Port's commercial activities during a period of significant industry realignment and led the swift recovery of its largest terminal following the biggest bankruptcy in shipping line industry history, clearing the path for record volumes in 2017 and 2018. Dr. Hacegaba began his career at the Port in 2010 as the executive officer to the Board of Harbor Commissioners and has more than 24 years of public and private sector experience, including stints at a Fortune 500 company for an elected official and as a management consultant. Dr. Hacegaba is a graduate of the University of Southern California, where he earned degrees in economics, business administration, and urban planning. He also earned his doctorate degree in public administration from the University of Laverne. He currently serves on the boards of various industry and nonprofit organizations, including HEIC. And finally, Bill Mongaluzzo, Senior Editor, Journal of Commerce, Maritime and Trade. A former senior editor at JOC Group, he is a 30-year veteran of covering the shipping industry. He provides leading journalistic coverage of trans-Pacific trade, intermodal rail and ports. He also frequently speaks at industry events and develops conference programs. JOC Group, a premier provider of U.S. seaborne trade intelligence through data, online content, and events, was acquired by IHS Markit in 2014, and JOC is now part of IHS Markit. Mr. Mongaluzzo holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri-Columbia and a master's degree in history from the University of New Orleans. I'm now honored to turn it over to Bill.
Thank you, Trevor. You hear me?
You're welcome. I can hear you.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. Thank you, HAIC, for inviting me and the Journal of Commerce to participate in your event. What I am going to do is briefly bring everybody up to date with what happened over the past year, and which in a couple of words was cargo volumes, record cargo volumes. So I will do that, and then we'll get into discussions with our panelists. So let's go back to January, February last year. We had what was known as supply destruction in China because of COVID. The factories were shut down. The imports from Asia plummeted as a result of that. Immediately following the reopening of the factories in China, we had demand destruction in the U.S. Because of the COVID closures in our country. And that continued really through the spring. And then all of a sudden, in late June, imports from Asia began to explode. And they have remained at record or near record volumes ever since the beginning in late June, right through this month. And when we get the peers numbers, JOC affiliate peers for March, I'm sure it'll show yet another record or near record month of imports. And just to give you a volume perspective of what we're talking about, LA Long Beach since July has imported from Asia, imports from Asia, about 800,000 TEUs per month consistently, with no slack months in that period. For comparison, the number 2 port in the United States, New York, New Jersey, imported an average of 200,000 TEUs from Asia. And then it drops to Savannah, about 160,000. You get the picture. 4 or 5 times what the other port complexes have been handling have moved through LA Long Beach consistently. And what is very difficult about this scenario for the terminal operators is that they cannot plan for any down periods. Every month is a peak month. Whereas in past years, you could look at your calendar and predict how busy we're going to be. January, you're going to be busy because of the pre-Chinese New Year rush. February and March, you're going to slow down because of the factories, taking their time to reopen in Asia. Now you don't have that. Every month is busy. And why is that? It's, to use the word of Gene Soroka at the Port of Los Angeles, replenishment. We are now on a totally new cycle driven by e-commerce, in which the retailers have to constantly replenish their inventory so they do not have any stock outages, which translates to stock outages mean you don't have the product that your customers want. So this is the situation that we have been in since the summer last year. And then real quickly, I'm going to tick off the various operational issues that have resulted from this and that our panelists are going to discuss. So vessels leaving Asian ports late because the congestion, equipment shortages there. Vessel on-time performance in the Trans-Pacific is horrible. Less than 15% on time, 15%. I don't know an industry that could survive with less than 15% on time performance. Well, the carriers are doing it. Vessel bunching at the ports and especially in LA Long Beach. Every day now at anchor, you're still looking at 20 to 22 at anchor that are waiting berthing space. Now that's down from 28 to 30 a couple of months ago, but it's not where it should be. Excessive container dwell times on the terminals. We had some real labor shortages due to COVID, which are being corrected now. And the big issue for our terminal operators here is a shortage of skilled equipment operators in the yard. The longshoremen and women who move the containers into the stacks and out of the stacks and deliver them to the truckers. Chassis shortages, elevated truck turn times at the gates, and more recently, rail car shortages, which we'll get into with our discussion. So with that introduction, can we have our panelists back on? And I'm going to ask each panelist to briefly discuss the issues at their ports. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Bill.
And let's see, do we have Noel here? Well, Mike, why don't you get started, please?
Okay, good. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody today. I hope you guys are enjoying your chicken and that great cheesecake that comes at the end. So enjoy it today. But a lot of folks like talking about port congestion, and I'm not too crazy about that word. I think it has a bad connotation. Our ports are busy because right now, and as you said, we're replenishing stock. Major ports around the world are strained under the weight of the unprecedented consumer spending and ramp up of business spending as COVID-19 restrictions are being lifted. And as you talked about the ships at anchor, Bill, today, what we're seeing right now, ships at berth at the Port of LA, we have 17 container ships. And typically we have, anywhere from 12 to 13. So today we have 17 container ships at berth. And there are 20 currently for San Pedro Bay, 20 container vessels at anchor. And as you said, we saw some numbers that were pretty high. Earlier in the year, we were about 30 containers, even over 30 containers at anchor. But now we're down to 20. So that's a good move. And I'll discuss some of those drivers at anchor a bit later. In parallel, the record volume, is just astounding. Longshore labor shifts, the first 14 months of the year are up 13% over the weekly 4-year average. And without that deep labor pool, things would be much more worse. Shift levels are in the 50,000 per week range, and the 4-year average, if you looked at what the 4-year average was before, it was 40,000 per week range. Our terminals are operating at 90% capacity, as you talked about. Dwell is a key component, and we consider 80% a high ceiling for our terminals. So we need to all work together keep the cargo moving, we need everyone's cooperation. On the land side, both local and inland, we need to keep the containers moving to avoid equipment shortages here and abroad. And BCOs are making progress in reducing dwell time. And per the PMSA, some new stats that just came out for March, approximately 3.77 days on terminal dwell. And that's down from the 5+1 days, 5+ days that we saw in January. So we are seeing some improvements there. We'll talk a little bit later about rail cars and some of the other things, even on-street dwell. But that's just my opening comments for right now. So thank you, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Well then, Noel, if you could just, with your opening remarks, discuss some of the issues that you have been dealing with there at the Port of Long Beach, and what are y'all doing about it?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank HAIC for putting on this forum and your longstanding support and advocacy of ports and commerce in general. And we also want to thank you for putting this forum on so that we can have this dialogue with our customers and partners. But for over a year now, Bill, we have met with all of our valued customers and partners to discuss their supply chain challenges throughout the pandemic. We've weathered many of these challenges that you summarized very well at the beginning, from the early days of 2020, the lockdowns and blank sailings to the historic wave of cargo as demand of imports continue to surge. And as I've been saying, we went from doom and gloom to fast and furious on the turn of a dime. And that caught the entire supply chain system by surprise. And so we're still playing catch up. I mean, some of the metrics that Mike already mentioned as it relates to ships at anchorage and some of the other KPIs that give us a sense of fluidity across the system are still in inadequate categories. So we're working around the clock to try to get the supply chain system to be rebalanced and make sure the equipment's where it's needed, make sure that we have the labor that's required, and make sure that this surge that has completely overwhelmed the system is being managed to get the cargo to where it needs to get. And as Mike pointed out, this issue of e-commerce, I mean, talk about trends that were set by COVID. Even before COVID, e-commerce was projected to double within 5 years. I think we can all agree that that trend is pretty much here already. In addition, there's a lot of changes on the retail side. There's such a thing as fast fashion. It used to be that fashion came in 4 seasons. Now it's up to 9. So there's this urgency by the retailers and the shippers to get that product replenished, as you pointed out, Bill. And as Gene likes to say, replenishment is the name of the game. In order to compete, it's not just on price, it's on getting the product on the shelf and making sure it's being delivered to the consumer. So just finally, in terms of my opening remarks, the bright story in all of this, the bright spot is that despite this historic pandemic, despite this historic surge, the port never closed a single day. Our men and women of the ILWU showed up, they masked up, they showed up to work every single day. And the supply chain, despite the challenges, continue to move. And so we recognize that that's not to minimize any of the pain that some of our shippers are enduring and have endured over the last several months. But we're working around the clock to make sure that the supply chain continues to move.
And Noel, thanks for that shout out for the longshoremen and women, because they really have put their lives at risk to come in every day and do their job so commerce can keep flowing. And so then, Noel, maybe you could pick up with initially with the question I posed to Mike, but this is actually for both of you. Okay, we are dealing in a situation where things are really tight still, but they're loosening up. Okay, we know that the normal, seasonal movements that we've contended with or processed in past years, they should start picking up soon. So back to school merchandise will be coming in for the next school season, and that'll blend, into the holiday merchandise. So if you can take an educated guess as to how many months do we have before we're going to see what could be considered the next big surge of freight.
Well, that's the question of the day, Bill. I mean, I think everyone would agree we haven't had a normal year in quite some time. Every year seems to meet us with a different type of disruption. And, the peaks and valleys, the traditional peaks and valleys that you described at the onset have been replaced, at least since last July, by this continuous wave of cargo that has not let up. So my best guess, Bill, in talking to our shippers and our partners on the industry side, is that come July, August, we'll begin to see the foot off the pedal a little bit. But as you pointed out, that's around the time that we start seeing the pre-holiday peak, the back to school, and everything that comes with it. So I would say we may see a dip in July, August, but that dip is not going to be very deep, and it's not going to last very long. And I think that's just going to open the door for what we expect to be another strong, holiday season.
Thanks, Noel. And Mike?
Yeah, I agree with what Noel said. I think the thing we need to do to prepare for that, and you're going to have a little dip, and we're seeing, here we're in April, the 14th, mid-April, and we're down to 20 and 20 ships at anchor. And then you looked at where we were at last month, where we were at 30 ships at anchor. So if we chip away at that and get us down to possibly June before we recover, I think the key thing though is that we need to get cargo moving out of the terminals as quickly as possible to free up space, because when we do get this next wave of the Christmas items that'll be coming in, the fall and Christmas items coming in August, as Noel has indicated, we need to be prepared, and we need to be prepared by having our terminals in good shape, having warehouses being able to accept cargo, and making sure that the rail carriers have the rail cars available, as well as the chassis providers. That's the key as well. And we're seeing, unfortunately with chassis right now, we're seeing dwell close to 7 days out on the street. And as you know, the Pool of Pools was built on 4 days dwell. So as you continue to grow with chassis out on the street, that impacts the availability of chassis on terminal. But on the other note, just with chassis, is that we're seeing a lot more of the private fleet out there. And as reported by the chassis providers, they said that gate activity, because they're getting some gate reads of chassis going through because of the license plate readers, they're seeing about 55% of the chassis gate moves are being done with the private fleet. So we're seeing that shift from people going from the Pool of Pools, and even that pool has diminished from, I think it was 78,000 when we first started, down to a little over 50,000 right now in the Pool of Pools, in that people are using the private fleet. So the dwell can even be longer with some of those, because we don't have the visibility to that. But again, keeping that flow going, because if the private fleet of chassis is tied up, then they're going to look for Pool of Pools. And guess what? The Pool of Pools is not going to have the chassis, because they've gotten them out of the fleet because the demand was not there. So I think fluidity is going to be very important as we lead up to the next wave of what's going to be coming in. And it's probably going to be around August, September period as well.
And that was very good that you brought up the shift to private owned or leased chassis, because just to give a comparison, New York, New Jersey, I think they were like in the 70% or higher privately owned chassis, and that just really what we eventually want is for the U.S. to stop being the only country in the world where the truckers and forwarders don't control all the chassis. Literally the only country in the world. So we've got to get to join the rest of the world, and this will add a significant, it'll eliminate a significant roadblock to prosperity here.
Yeah, and I think, Bill, at one time, I think the U.S. was a little bit more of we'll call it a wheeled operation. When I worked for APL for 19 years, all the containers were on chassis so that you can get the quick turn times. But now we're getting more and more to a grounded operation in the terminals, and that lends to being able to diverse from chassis being on the terminal and getting them out to the trucking community. So I think the mode has changed over the years, and I think we're leading towards that.
Yes,
and Bill, that's probably
well.
one distinction. I was just going to say that being the only country in the whole world that has this model, it's not a distinction we want,
right,
and I think we now understand why.
Definitely,
but as Mike said very, very well,
yes,
that is also compromising our fluidity.
And actually, the wheeled operation that had its purpose, and terminals were much more efficient if you could store the container comes off the vessel, it's put immediately on a chassis, the trucker shows up bobtail, retrieves the chassis / container unit, and away he or she goes. And that we just don't have the real estate to operate those type of operations anymore.
And that's when we were combined doing 10 million TEUs, and now we're doing 17 million TEUs. So
exactly.
That's not going to happen. And unfortunately, we can't build too many more pure 400s out there.
No, you're right. So on that positive note, Noel, let's just start discussion on the latest breaking news, I guess we could say, was the Suez Canal blockage that, the canal was down for 6 days. Now, directly, that didn't impact routes from Asia to the West Coast. It did impact routes from Asia to the East Coast, and it crushed the trade lane from Asia to Europe. So even though the ports on the West Coast will not feel a direct impact from that event, there I think is going to be a residual impact in Asia, where these containers are going to be weeks late in getting back to Asian ports to be reloaded with shipments to the U.S. West Coast as well as other trade lanes. So is the port bracing for an impact from the Suez Canal closure?
Well, first of all, Bill, I think the blockage at the Suez Canal is a reminder to all of us that the interconnectedness of global trade means that congestion anywhere in the supply chain will eventually ripple across the entire system. I would say that the temporary blockage, the Suez Canal, forced shippers to reroute cargo. For us on the West Coast, at that point in time, it meant that we could see more containers, but any increase would be modest. For example, we did not expect to receive any additional extra loaders, but perhaps more boxes on some of the ships already scheduled to come. But as you pointed out, it's one system, and it's the same entities that are transporting cargo using the same equipment, using the same containers, and they have to look for a way to get that cargo to destination. So again, another reminder of how integrated we are. But with that as your question, what does it mean for the West Coast? I mean, you were talking earlier about the physical constraints of ports today, and Mike alluded to the fact that just 10 years ago, the two ports combined were handling 10 million TEU. Last year it was 18 million plus. In fact, we're now in line with our recent updated cargo forecast that puts us at 27 million TEU between the two ports by 2030, and just north of 40 million by 2040. And so the question has to be, how are the ports preparing for that massive amount of volume? And I think it goes back to what, Bill, what you and Mike were saying earlier. We've got to figure out a way to achieve fluidity and drive efficiencies without the additional luxury of physical space. I mean, one example I can offer is during the pandemic, we identified about 40 acres at Pier S in Long Beach that we used as a staging site. That was a way to provide relief to our terminals who were receiving these additional extra loaders. But what that did, and it was a wheeled operation, and what that did, Bill, is allow the terminals to move those containers out of the terminal, their container yards, as quickly as possible so that they can continue to work the ship. So these are the kinds of things that I believe ports going into the future are going to have to do, these out-of-the-box thinking, innovative solutions to handle this volume of cargo that will not decrease, it will only increase. And the last point I'll make is, at the risk, Bill, of jumping to one of your other questions, is we have to take a serious look at how we as a supply chain are going to transition to 24-hour operations. Jeremy Nixon from ONE made that comment at TPM. I don't think it was news to anyone. The railroads have made that comment as recently as this week in the article that you carried, Bill, about the need to have 24/7 operations if we want to see that balance in the system that we need to ensure fluidity. So I think that's where things are headed. And the good news is that the ports here in Los Angeles and Long Beach, we're always on the cutting edge. We're always ahead, always trying to be as proactive as possible. We've got harbor commissioners that support, that are leaders and innovative. So I think we've got a good thing going here, but we really have a lot of work to do, and that's what we're going to continue to focus on. Thanks.
And even though you did take us a little off script, I think we should address this issue right now, Mike. Noel discussed what the Port of Long Beach is doing as far as PRS and SSA, a tenant in Long Beach, has been doing dray-offs for decades now. What are you seeing at the Port of Los Angeles as far as those types of process improvements that the port maybe could facilitate to keep the containers moving through the marine terminals?
Yeah, and Bill, if I can just go back real quick on the Suez question as well. I think, I think what's happened is because people were not getting their cargo into the East Coast, there's higher demand of, hey, I need that cargo that's here on the West Coast, get it on the train and get it back there. So that's probably been some of the initiatives that the cargo owners have been doing is the cargo that's probably was scheduled for the West Coast, diverting it to the East Coast in order to meet the demands back there. And I think that's probably one of the impacts of the Suez. But as far as, like Noel said, any ship routing changes, it was probably too short of a period of time for any reaction of that sort to take place. So I think on the Suez thing, it's more, hey, the cargo that's already here in the US, let's get it, or on the West Coast, let's get it to the East Coast as quickly as possible. But as Noel has said, we're looking at ways, and we have to be able to be more efficient in the terminals, looking at 24/7 operations to move cargo out, but really looking at inland container yards. And I think that's the key thing. And as Noel says, they provided PRS, which is close to the port. That's great. But I think we need to be a little bit further out and need to be out where the final destination of what that cargo is going to be. And that's why we continue to talk to the railroads about the potential of a near dock rail, or I'm sorry, short haul rail out to the Inland Empire, because that's where a lot of the distribution centers are at, as well as the transload facilities. So being able to try to find land closer to where the cargo is going to go for that last mile is probably going to be the key, and also getting that cargo moving quickly. I think we still need to really push for the peel-off piles. I think that's paramount in getting cargo out of the terminals. And the reason for that is you just cannot afford to pick and choose which container needs to go out. I think you need to take from the top and work your way down and get it out. That's the only way you're going to get quick turn times and get cargo out to inland locations. And again, looking for space inland, I think, is going to be the key, and getting the containers closer to where that last mile is at. And you think about, the trucking community that we require here at the port, or people that have to have concession agreements with the port. And so if you have a different group of people that do that last mile delivery, it probably opens it up to more truck availability to get it out to the distribution center, that they don't require a TWIC card, they won't need to have a concession agreement with the port, and maybe even having a different truck than what the ports are going to require in the future to pick up at the port. So I think we're going to need to be looking more at the off-dock options and get the cargo out as quickly as possible through peel-off operations.
Hey, Bill, and if I could just build on what Mike said, because I agree with him 100%. What the pandemic taught us is that, we as port authorities can do everything humanly possible to apply solutions to the surge, but we're just a node, if you will. We're just a piece of the supply chain. And the point about having these inland, rail yards, inland points to get the containers out of the ports as quickly as possible, that's something we have to do like yesterday, right? I mean, the volumes we're managing now necessitate that. And that includes the warehouses. I mean, one of the reasons why we haven't seen containers leave the terminals as quickly as perhaps they should is because the warehouses are fully subscribed, right? So we as ports need to see the broader view of the system. We have to look at the system, where the container goes next, and make sure that there's enough deposit areas, if you will, or locations to drop them off. So just wanted to add to what Mike said, but I agree with him 100%.
And we're seeing these warehouses and transload facilities going further east, right? I mean, I drive out to the desert a lot, and I'm seeing that you go past the 60 and over into Banning, and you're starting to see places building up over there, which has a lot of land, and it maybe give us an opportunity of getting that location as an inland yard as well. But again, that getting the cargo out of the terminals as quickly as possible is going to help us achieve our long-term TEU counts, I think.
And this whole concept of the inland port, now we see they're doing that like in Charleston, Savannah, whatever. So this is not an untried, solution. But the both ports have been looking at this for, I'm going to guess, close to 10 years. And I think the location that had always been brought up was around Colton, where you have that rail hub there. So it seems like a lot of the pieces are almost in place, but the objection or the concern that I always heard is, well, the ports don't control the rail tracks, the two railroads do. And normally railroads, if it's less than 1,000 miles, they're not interested, let alone, less than 100 miles. So how do we get the railroads to buy into this concept?
Yeah, and I think, obviously it's more expensive than trucking, but trucking has gotten expensive as well. I think, you first start off with proof of concept, and you do it with trucking. So let's find that yard inland. And I know there's a lot of private entities that have some yards available. And what you do is you have that yard available, and let's start trucking out there to get the people excited and the proof of concept to work. And then you migrate over into the rail, because it's going to take a while to make sure the tracks are available between downtown LA and out to Colton. The Alameda Corridor is not the issue. It's really beyond that, because there's more than just our cargo trains that are on those tracks. And so it has to be coordinated properly to get out there. But I think you do the trucking first, and again, tying that with peel-off piles. I mean, I remember a terminal always told me, you give me 10 trucking companies and I'll make 10 piles, and I'll deliver cargo as fast as can be out of the terminals. And I think all those, as we always said, everything's interlocking and a chain here. We need to do all those things to make it work and make it efficient. Noel?
Yeah, no, Mike, you said it well. I think the key here again is we have to view ourselves as a broader system. And I think it's fair to say that even though we have had these discussions over time, there's been ebb and flow interest in inland, port destination, for example, or near port rail yard. I think the conversations are getting more serious just because of the volumes. But as Mike said, we need to make sure that whatever developments take place are done in concert and in close coordination with the railroads. They need balance to ensure that their business models are being satisfied. And as Mike said, the modal comparisons in terms of cost between truck and train will factor into the economics of that. But there have been conversations in the past. If we continue to see the volumes that we have in recent years, and we continue to stay in line with our long-term cargo forecast, it's not even going to be a question, Bill. I mean, we're going to have to pursue these types of inland points just to be able to manage and handle the container volume.
Great, thank you both. Okay, let's get back on script now. One issue that the Southern California ports face is an imbalance between imports and exports, and that's just the way it is here, because one, you have a very large population center, but two, a lot of the cargo, probably 2/3 of it, ends up in the eastern half of the country, either directly IPI or transloading and then shipping east on the via domestic rail. So I don't think the imbalance is going to correct itself anytime soon. So what impact is that having on the supply chain? And are there any measures that we could mitigate that?
Yeah, I would say it's having a significant impact. If you talk to the class ones, they'll tell you that some of the shortages that we're experiencing here in Southern California are the result of that imbalance on a network basis, Bill. I mean, the numbers are telling. When you look at the percentage of exports relative to imports here in Southern California, just 5 years ago, that was close to 50%. Today, that's closer to 40%. So that confirms the point you made that a lot of these inbound containers, these containers are arriving to us in the form of imports, but they're leaving the country through other gateways, right? And so the need for these, for the need to accommodate this balance to meet more export business is something we really need to prioritize. And the fact that we're on the West Coast and we have the advantage of our close proximity to Asia necessitates that. I mean, our biggest trade partner by far is China. When you look at the Chinese economy and how it's evolving, I mean, just 10 years ago, their middle class was 4% of their entire population. Today, it's almost 33%. So we know that the demand for U.S. goods, for U.S. exports will only continue to grow. Our value proposition has to be, how do we manage the influx and inbound containers, and at the same time, make it so that our exporters can continue to strive through our supply chain. So I think that's got to be done. But again, as Mike pointed out earlier, everything has got to be done in concert and coordination with the railroads, with the shippers, and make sure that there's coordination across the board.
Thanks, Noel.
Yeah.
Mike?
Yeah, I agree with what Noel said. Interesting, fact for February for Port of LA, we had, and I'm looking at the numbers here, we had 412,000 TEUs of imports. On exports, we had 101,000. So big difference. But take a look at the empties. We had 285,000 empties. So if you put the two of them together, we were almost a match back. Not quite there, but again, it wasn't because of the exports. Now you have to also think that the ships that come to LA also do a second port call, and that second port call is Oakland. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the shippers are looking at Oakland as a gateway, because you want to get that last move of especially the perishable stuff, making sure that it doesn't stay on the ship very long time. So they're moving it out of Oakland because of that second port call, and that's always been the case of Oakland, a heavy export port versus an import port, and it's because of that. But also, during the tough times, when imports were strong, no doubt about it, the shipping lines were turning down export bookings and in favor of empty containers, because they wanted to get those empty containers back to Asia, because the revenue was a lot better for an import container than a $500 scrap metal or waste paper shipment. So I think that also played a part in some of the things that were taking place. But I believe there was an article yesterday that the ag community said that they had a banner year for ag exports. So I think it might have been on certain commodities, maybe not everything, but on certain commodities that they might have been shipping export. So it all depends on the gateway, I think. And also, like Noel said, the equipment availability inland, is it at the right location? Is that import container going where that export next move is at? And sometimes it's not, because the two don't coordinate very well, the locations.
And Mike, I think what you were referring to, and maybe I can offer a comment on, despite the fact that ag exporters were told regularly that, we can't get your exports, we can't, have the exports on the vessel, we have to fill it up with empties and get them back to Asia. Yet, it was a very good year for exports, I think of most types, but yes, for ag too. So what I think is the situation is that despite having a good year for exports, there is so much demand overseas for U.S. exports that if the supply chain could get, more equipment to exporters, not only of ag, but of paper, of, anything that is a quote unquote commodity, scraps of all types, that probably we could have had, a huge year. It's just that the equipment wasn't there. So, yeah, it's one more call out to the supply chain and the equipment providers, et cetera. Let's try to increase the assets that we move to our ports.
And I'm sure tariffs had some issues with it as well, right? The export tariffs.
Yeah.
Also had a component of that.
Yeah, that they would have been even higher if it weren't for the tariffs, which clobbered U.S. exports, and we mentioned the word China. I mean, let's face it, China is the #1 source of U.S. imports, especially for West Coast ports and LA Long Beach. And what happened because of the tariffs in 2018? U.S. imports from China plummeted by, like every month, year over year, 10, 15, 20%. But when the economy picked up last summer, and U.S. imports from Asia began to grow rapidly, which country had the existing capacity to manufacture the items that Americans buy? China. Yes, Vietnam, kicked in, and all of these other Southeast Asian markets, but they are pretty much capped on their physical production capacity right now. China isn't. China already has all the infrastructure in place. They have that village where the suppliers of the components are right next door to the assemblers of those components. So I've been looking at the China import numbers the last few months, and they're growing something like 20%, where imports from Asia as a whole are maybe growing half that amount. So China's back in the game, and
we even have hand sanitizer being made in China, right?
I mean, you name it, and that's it. I mean, you can flip a light switch in China, and the lights come back on immediately.
Yeah. Well, Bill, just to illustrate that point, I mean, since you mentioned the tariffs, the impact of these tariffs in China, in 2019, when we saw the drastic reduction in imports and exports as a result of those tariffs, we calculated that it would take an increase. It would basically take 5 times of our trade with Vietnam just to offset the losses in volume between China. So it's really hard to replicate what China has been doing so well for so long. Their capacity is truly far and ahead, unparalleled. It's going to take some time for Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, some of these other Southeast Asian countries to catch up. So, I mean, your point is well taken. Plus, as I mentioned a moment ago, the population of China, their purchasing power, that's not slowing down. Their middle class is about 33% of their overall population now. That's a lot of consumption, and they desire these American goods quite a bit. I don't know. I mean, maybe Mike, we can send some of these American-made sanitizers to China. I don't know if they would buy them or not, but
hey, even the PPE that we've been waiting for is coming in from China. I mean, at one time we announced that Honeywell was making the N95 masks over in Phoenix, but then I get a call from Honeywell saying, I have a couple of containers out here of masks. We need them in right away. I said, I thought you're making them in Phoenix. No. We needed to supplement them by making them in China. So
it's just interesting, the supply chain. But then to follow up on a point that you made, Mike, as far as other ports on the West Coast, and Oakland, being the traditional export gateway. However, what we have seen in the last couple of months is that carriers have started one first inbound call to Oakland. So that's the port of Oakland has been asking carriers for years, give us at least one inbound call, so we could be first to handle these imports. And there's a growing demand for imports, if for nothing else, the Bay Area population. And now we got an announcement of a second first call inbound to Oakland service that's going to be starting. And then the carriers have also initiated some services to the PNW, Seattle, Tacoma, Vancouver. Now, those will all help to relieve some of the pressure on LA Long Beach for imports. But do you think this is a trend that we're going to see more of? Can the northern ports handle a significant increase in imports the way Southern California has been handling them?
Well, I think right now, with 20 ships at anchor, we welcome the relief and making sure that the customers get their cargo, because I know there's a lot of people within the supply chain that are looking for their containers. As you know, the auto manufacturers are waiting for parts so that they can keep the assembly lines going. So any relief at other ports is welcomed. I think what it does, though, is we have to look at this as a big system here, because obviously that means those rail cars that we were thinking were going to come to LA are now going to be in Oakland, because you got to get Oakland doesn't have enough of the local market like we do here and the transloading capabilities, that means it's intermodal cargo. So now the rail cars and the rail carriers are going to have to make sure they balance where they're going to send the rail cars to, Oakland, LA, and that's something that needs to be looked at as a total system. So I think that's more discussions on that and more thinking about how that would work is going to be paramount, because again, you don't want to short the rail cars that we need here for the many more ships that arrive first call here than they do in Oakland. That's my thoughts.
Okay. Anything you want to add on that topic, Noel?
No, I agree with Mike. I think he covered it well.
Great. Okay, well, let's, Noel, pick up on a subject that you mentioned, referencing Jeremy Nixon of One and 24/7 operations. That can be a very complex issue to pull off. For example, on the labor side, the West Coast contract for all the West Coast ports has shifts defined. And for LA Long Beach, you have the day shift, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. You have the evening shift, 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. And then you have what's called the hoot owl gate from 3 a.m. to 8 a.m., which is only 5 hours. I was talking to a terminal operator in Long Beach who said, rather than kind of mess with the established work shifts, we could get probably 20 hours a day of consistent cargo handling if we have an early flex gate in the morning. So instead of opening at 8, open at 7. And then early flex gate the evening shift from 6 p.m. to 5 p.m., which then runs, of course, right into the end of the first shift. And so conceivably, you could have continuous operations from 7 a.m. to 3 a.m. the next morning, and that gives 4 hours for the terminals to clean up and do what they have to do. Is there any talk about and not that the terminals don't need any permission, individually they could do that, but anybody kind of brainstorming as a port community, let's see about running consistent flex gates for all the terminals and at least have an immediate hit and increase in hours.
Well, first of all, Bill, you mentioned that it's complex, right? Mm-hmm. I've been at the port now almost 12 years, and nothing's easy at the port, right? Mm-hmm. But the one thing that I think is critical for us to start exploring with great seriousness, as I mentioned at the beginning, is this notion of having a supply chain that is truly 24/7. We already have segments that are 24/7. The railroads are 24/7, right? Mm-hmm. Some of the shippers, their operations are 24/7. So what we need to start mapping out is the incremental plan to get there. And I think the example that you're using by citing the opportunities and the possibilities within the terminals, and their gate hours. Just in the last, 8 months, as the two ports have managed this historic surge, the terminals on both sides of the bay have maximized their gate hours. If you look at their gate hours, they're fully maximizing day shift, night shift. And some of them are even, more of them, I should say, are open on Saturdays now. So we're already seeing directionally them moving that direction. We have not been in any discussions with the marine terminal operators or the ILWU, so I don't want to comment on the status of that. That's not in our purview. But the one thing I can tell you is that we have to start the dialogue. We have to start convening the entire supply chain and start talking about how we're going to migrate to that 24/7 operation. We have to talk to the warehouses. We have to talk to the terminals, obviously, but we also have to talk to the trucking companies. I mean, we have to talk to our legislators as well, our policymakers, who define our operating environment, how we're going to get there. I mean, as I said a moment ago, 20 years ago, it was a utopian, idealistic, nice to have. Given the experience of the last couple of years, it's becoming more and more of a necessity.
Very, very good. And I wanted to ask about the physical capacity, marine terminal capacity of the ports. I have a question for our folks who are running this. Are we getting any questions from the audience? I don't see anything coming up on the chat. So if there are any pressing questions from our listeners, if you could send those to us or to me, and I'll hand them off. So, well,
Hey, Bill, can I comment a little bit more on the 24/7
yes,
as well?
definitely, Mike.
So, as Noel says, I mean, we have the capabilities, and I mean, the ILW contract, the PMA contract allows for ship operations to take place 24 hours a day, right? Like you said, there's the day shift, the night shift, and the hoot shift. And terminals do that. If there's a need to get a ship out, and probably during these times when ships are waiting at anchor for 5 days, 6 days, they want to get them back on schedule, they're probably working hoot shifts. And that's allowed within the contract, as well as the flex gates are allowed in the contract. And I think you'll see terminals that are doing that in order to get things rolling earlier, 7 a.m., 5 p.m. Starts. And they can do that. So they can do that per the contract. I think, going back, and I hate to keep repeating myself, but going back to, if we ever get to the point where we have to do dray-offs to an inland yard, that's where it's ideal to do these 24-hour moves, because you really don't need a warehouse to be open at the inland location. You could just dray out, take them to a yard out there, and then that last mile can be done when it's convenient for the warehouse. So I think, as we migrate towards more of getting cargo off the terminal in a quicker fashion and getting them to an off-dock yard, the 24/7 would definitely come in handy, because you definitely would like moving a container at 3 a.m. because the freeway is wide open to get out to those areas, as we know, if we've ever driven on the freeway that late. So just a thought on that as well. But capabilities are there to work 24/7. It's very costly, but it is available to be done.
Very, very good. And I could see how that dovetails with what you were saying about the starting the inland yard concept with trucking, prove that it works. And then if the volumes continue to increase rapidly, then find a way to move large chunks of cargo on train.
And I think the struggle with the short haul rail is, where do you assemble that train? You can't have 12 terminals doing a sprint train out to Ontario, right? You need it to be consolidated somewhere. So how do you figure that out? And I think that's one of the challenges as well, is how do you put one train together that's going to give you 200 containers out to the Inland Empire, or 400 containers, whatever it may be, to get that long train.
Yeah, that takes a lot of documentation where you can pinpoint the exact containers, and don't send one that's destined for transloading to that.
Correct.
That's not
Correct.
what you want. So very
Correct.
good. Okay, well then, on physical capacity, we know for a fact that LB's Long Beach Container Terminal will complete its final phase of expansion by the end of this year. In fact, it's being phased in as we speak. And that will add 1 million TEUs on top of the 2.4 million TEUs annual capacity that LBCT already has. To my knowledge, that is the only terminal expansion that is imminent. So I don't know, maybe Mike, Noel, do you want to start by telling us about the impact of LBCT? And then Mike, anything you see on your side that could lead to, and we don't have to talk about, you know, 1 million TU capacity, maybe just adding some acreage that may be available to increase the marine terminal capacity. So, Noel, you want to start?
Sure, Bill. So let's start with LBCT. This additional million TU throughput capacity that is going to be introduced with this phase 3, which is set to be completed this summer. I mean, just for those who are watching, to put that in perspective, LBCT at 3.4 million TU will have the capacity of the 4th largest port in the U.S., right? That's a lot of cargo that's going to be coming in through just a single terminal. And so what we're doing right now, Bill, to your point, we don't have any plans in place today to develop any new terminals beyond LBCT. Our focus right now is on building out infrastructure that's necessary to help support our 6 container terminals, right? So our Pier B on-dock rail support facility, for example, that is going to more than triple our rail capacity at full build-out. The project itself is going to be implemented in phases, and with each phase and milestone, there will be incremental increases in rail capacity. So this 3rd phase, for example, that you referenced at LBCT, it's all rail. So in order for us to fully maximize and help LBCT realize the investments in rail, we have to create the physical rail infrastructure to support that. So that's where Pier B comes into play. It's going to be a critical project that will actually support the complex, right? That's what's going to allow, you know, when Mike was talking earlier about staging and sorting out the trains, that's what Pier B is going to give us the ability to do. So that's where we're headed next. You know, we're about $1.7 billion for CapEx for the next 10 years. That's our plan in Long Beach right now. And that's coming off of a 10-year, $4 billion CapEx program, right? So that's what we believe we need to do. The other projects that are also in motion right now include the Pier J, Pier G, rail project that will also amplify our rail capacity in the complex. We've got a few other smaller rail projects that are in the awning as well. And again, all of this to support our existing terminals and their rail operations.
And hopefully the railroads are listening and they start bringing in more locomotives and more intermodal rail cars, so LBCT's phase 3 doesn't just sit there idle. So very good, Noel. Mike,
they're listening.
They're listening.
I was just saying, no, they're listening and they're aware.
So thank you, Mike.
Yeah, and Noel's right. I mean, the infrastructure is going to be the key, but I think one of the things that we're looking at is, as you know, we have 40 acres of dirt that's right next to Phoenix Marine terminal. So we are in discussions with them of how we can activate that site and get that going with an additional 40 acres. It's not nearly what LBCT can be doing as well. But then also, we're doing some rail projects. We have the rail project for APMT, which is some storage tracks out there. We're doing a small rail project up near Trapac, which helps move the trains a lot easier in and out of the West Basin area. That's being looked at as well. And then we are working on an EIR for Yangming that has densification within their rail yard as well. As far as Everport terminal, you know, we have an EIR that's been approved that gives them the ability to expand across the street. So we'll be in discussions with them on that. So that provides a little bit more acreage to the terminals. Again, not substantial. There's no Pier 400 or Pier 500 that's being built that's going to have a lot of acreage. But looking at the infrastructure, looking at the rail network, looking at the roadway infrastructure as well, it's going to be great once the the old Gerald Desmond Bridge comes down, because then you have the ability to bring that bigger ship under that bridge as well. Once that is removed, and so just the infrastructure is being looked at, I think, as a way to facilitate this cargo flow.
Interesting.
Hey, Bill, and can I also mention, my focus was really on the rail side, but in terms of near-term capacity enhancing projects, at ITS Pier G, we have a wharf extension project that's underway. Our board recently gave us the green light to proceed. And what that will do is it will allow ITS to handle two 14,000 TEU ships simultaneously. And so that's just another example of some of the near-term projects, as Mike said. The other sort of last frontier, if you will, for us on the Long Beach side is Pure S. That's about 160 acres of land. And so we have no defined plans for that yet, but we are exploring different options. And again, that's going to be an opportunity for us to really map that out and think about how we can raise the bar and move the needle when it comes to efficiency. So we're very much looking forward to see how the market responds and how we can leverage some of these last frontier opportunities to really move the needle on that.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And we're doing the same with, you mentioned the wharf. We're doing a wharf upgrade for Everport as well, where they're going to be able to handle two 14,000s at the same time as well. And that should be done sometime this summer for them as well.
Wow. And this brings up what I think is kind of an interesting and rapid change of attitude in the harbor. It wasn't very long ago, maybe back in 2018 into 2019, the feeling was that we have three Japanese-owned terminals, one for each of the three Japanese steamship lines that are now literally one, ONE. And the thinking was, well, maybe we don't need all three of those terminals. Maybe one of them, since there's only one Japanese shipping line now, maybe they can consolidate their operations in two, and then we'll have options for this other terminal. It doesn't look like we're going to have any rest to be able to reimagine anything for these other terminals because they're all busy.
Yes.
Well, Bill, that shows just how quickly the market changes, right? 3-4 years ago, that was a conventional wisdom, if you will. That was a popular opinion. But these days, the volumes we're handling in now, the volumes that we anticipate handling in the years ahead, necessitate every square inch, if you will, of footprint.
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to give up any property right now, and even if it's not going to service the O&E, you got other carriers that are looking for outlets as well. So you think about you think about who the operators really are. They're not the shipping lines that operate it. It's really a terminal operator that's out there, and that terminal operator can sell that space and cater to any of the shipping lines. And I'll tell you, we got people banging on our door saying, "I need berth space." So plenty of opportunities for these terminal operators to continue operating and to look at longer term leases as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. I mean, when you look at the traditional model, especially for landlord ports like ours, it used to be the case that shipping lines owned, they controlled through a subsidiary the lease for a marine terminal operation. But there's a recent trend now where you have entities outside the shipping line industry that are doing that, and they're entering into these long-term leases with the expectation that there's going to be a return on their investment. So I think that trend, Bill, is also going to make it even more important for all of the terminals to cater to a wide range of shipping line customers.
Yeah, there's a lot of venture capital money into these terminals. I mean, as you know, 49% of the two O&E terminals are with one's with Macquarie, the other one's with Brookfield on the LA side. Yeah. So they own 49% of it. So they're looking to make sure that they continue to move cargo through there, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the O&E cargo.
That's right.
And speaking of leases, at the very high level, I know both ports like to be diversified. I mean, it's good for the Port Authority. You have a diversity of income coming in, be it container or scrap. There's a scrap terminal, automobiles, whatever. Each contributes to the port's bottom line and your ability to be able to reinvest capital. But eventually these leases are going to come due, and do you see the ports, looking closely at revenue potential as a driver? And if a terminal or a facility that had been dedicated to a certain type of terminal could be connected with a container terminal or made into a container terminal, which would produce more revenue for the port. Do you think that's a possibility?
I think the short answer is yes. I mean, I can tell you from our side, Bill, we're this exercise that you described is something we do on an ongoing basis, primarily with parcels of land that are currently vacant, for example, always looking for ways to monetize that, look for uses that generate revenue. Right now, when you look at our revenue sources, 3/4 of our operating revenues are generated by our container terminals. The balance, the 25%, is by non-container segments, lines of business. We pride ourselves in being a diversified port. The experience of 2018, 2019, when the tariffs whipsawed our container business, those years, it looked very smart to hold on to some of the non-container sides of business. So I think we'll continue to be a diversified port. There's no question about that. The question, though, is looking into the future, looking at how the market is evolving and the needs are evolving, is to look at all of our terminal assets, look at the leases, and see what opportunities might exist to optimize. The example I gave is Pure S, right? How could Pure S, for example, be optimized to support our container and even non-container lines of business? I mean, those discussions, I think, are already taking place. And the other point I'll make is that both ports, and I'll let Mike comment on their process, but we recently underwent master planning updates, right? That look at the long range and look at the possibilities of redevelopments, years, decades into the future. So it's an ongoing exercise, but again, a lot of it really has to be driven by the market. It has to be driven by the customers, their needs, and what opportunities they're looking for to enhance their business models.
Thanks, Noel. And Mike?
Yeah, Noel hit it right on the head. I mean, it's exactly true. I mean, we're looking at opportunities of how we can try to consolidate folks. We think, we still continue to think that try to minimize the number of operators that are out there, because you want to make sure you send the right size ship to the right terminal. You hate to see Pure 400 handling and not to pick on them, but a 3,000 TEU Horizon vessel, right, or a Pasha Hawaii ship. You should be sending the big ships out there, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we're looking at adjacent properties. I know we're talking to one client on do we move a person that's in their way so that they can get more space in their terminal to make it contiguous. Those are things that are being looked at as well. So we continue to look at how we can grow in the footprint that we have, in the area that we have, and you have to realize both of us, Long Beach and LA, have over 1,600 acres each of container terminals. And so if you densify more and you do, let's say you did 10,000 TEUs per acre, I mean, that's 32 million TEUs that you could potentially be doing if you did 10,000 TEUs per acre. So those are things that could be looked at. And 10,000 TEUs is not infeasible to do. I think some things would have to change, obviously getting chassis off terminal. Eventually, if we get to the trucker model, that's actually a natural way of it being done. But being more efficient within our terminals so that they do have the capabilities of doing 10,000 or up to 10,000 TEUs per acre, which then gives us the capacity that we're looking for.
Interesting, and I know it's getting late, so we don't have too much time to complete our discussion, but
yeah, the cheesecake is coming right now.
That's right. So I love dessert. So,
I'm still waiting for mine, by the
way. Good point. But automation of marine terminals. Now, the ports themselves, the port authorities, do not decide whether a terminal is going to be automated or not. It is totally the purview of the terminal, working in concert with the ILWU. But, and we know from Noel's discussion that a totally automated facility like LBCT can really, really densify its operations, 3.4 million TEU capacity a year. And we have TRAPAC on LA side. What are you hearing from terminal operators? Is further automation, a possibility?
You want me to start?
Well-
I'll go ahead, Noel, you first.
Bill, I think everyone who's watching this is in the know about what's happened in the last couple of years as it relates to that issue, right? And I don't want to move away from your question, but I think it's important to recognize that this is an issue that is cuts across all industries, right? This issue of automation, this issue of workforce development, and how we as a society, as an economy, are going to upskill, reskill, and ensure that we have folks who are prepared for the future. That's a different conversation. I think it's one worth having. We don't have the time to have it now, but I think generally, big picture, that has to be part of this discussion. In terms of your direct question about are there any plans, certainly from our standpoint at the Port of Long Beach, we have no plans to pursue any automation. And we've been clear with all of our terminals and our tenants, as you pointed out, that any terminal that may have plans for redevelopment or anything along the lines, they need to make sure that they work things out in coordination with the ILWU, right? So I just want to be abundantly clear about that. Having said that, this whole conversation we've had with you, Bill, is all about ways to raise the bar in efficiencies and ways to maximize our existing footprint. And I think that has to continue to be the focus. Before we contemplate any further developments, before we contemplate automation or anything else, let's work within the confines that we have. Let's look for ways to truly maximize what we've got and work in coordination, collaboration with our terminals, shipping lines, all of our supply chain partners to get us there. So that's what I believe we're already doing. And that's something that, as both Mike and I have said, we're going to have to continue to do.
Okay, then, Mike, do you want to wrap things up for us on that subject?
Yeah, and I think we'll react to whatever the customers are looking for. I mean, it is as you know, the two mayors have a goal that by 2030 we should be at zero emission yard equipment. So what does that mean? What does that mean for the terminal operators? So they're looking at different modes of how they can achieve that, right? I mean, there are electric UTRs out there today that are being driven by people, and it's working, right? So everything is being looked at of how you can achieve to that zero emission goal that the two mayors are trying to institute by 2030. I think we'll react to whatever the customers want. Definitely, we encourage the customers to work with the union to make sure that things are as they had negotiated within their contract, right? I think we're seeing, and we have APM terminals that's actually trying something new as far as a model where they're doing perimeter delivery, and could that play a part in how the future is? Because now you're keeping the trucker out of the terminal, and maybe that improves efficiencies as well and improves velocity. So those are things that are being looked at, and again, doesn't necessarily have to be automated, but we are looking at things that zero emission is going to be the key for us, and how we achieve that, whether it's through automation or with manned equipment, it's up to the terminal of how they want to implement that.
Yeah, the other thing, just very briefly, Bill, is that when you consider a project like LBCT, it takes time and it takes a lot of money, right?
Right.
So the investment is heavy. I can tell you that between our investment as a port authority and at the time the owner of LBCT, OOCL, combined, it was about a $2 billion investment. It's very, very expensive. So the question now has to be, to Mike's point about these new requirements to get us to zero emissions equipment, is how do you get there? And how do you raise the bar in efficiencies in the most cost-effective way? And I think all of these factors have to be worked in there, in addition to what I said earlier about the workforce development piece.
Yeah, and those are all very good points. And there is no silver bullet to get to zero emissions. There's going to be a lot of very dull-looking bullets, but a whole bunch of them to make all of this work. So I think with that we should turn back to our to Henry. Perfect. I think Henry's the perfect person to close things out. Thank you both.
Bill, thank you again for your time. The insight you bring is fantastic. Dr. Hacegaba, Port of Long Beach, again, thank you for your accessibility. Your team's fantastic to work with. And obviously, Mike DiBernardo, Deputy Executive Director also of Port of Los Angeles. Thank you for your time. I know you're on a time crunch. So everyone, I'm going to leave the floor view open if you'd still like to network, but that'll conclude our program for today. Thank you.
I'd just like to say thank you for everybody and their time that they spent listening to us. Hopefully we don't bore you guys with the same kind of the same answers, but we do work closely together on a number of initiatives. And again, I'd like to thank everyone, and we encourage everybody to move their cargo as quickly as possible. And we continue to vaccinate and make sure that everybody's back to work. And we really appreciate, as Noel said at the beginning, the Longshore has been great since day one of COVID. They've been here working, and it's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Ditto on all fronts. Thank you all so much.
Bill, great job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you,
As
guys.
always.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.